Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Parsha Pearls. We're going to continue this week from last week. Last week, we were talking about a perspective on happiness, what with us being in the Hebrew month of Adar, a time of particular joy, and what with the festival of Purim coming up. Let's take this to a whole other level. You know, it's not just we Jews, but the world in general also realizes that the human being consists of two elements. We have a body and we have a soul. Society might use a different word to soul, but there are still the same two different elements. There's the physical and, if you will, the mental or spiritual. And in philosophy, this dichotomy of the human being consisting of two separate components presents a very complex problem. In philosophy, it's called the mind-body problem. What is the mind-body problem? The body is, of course, something physical. The mind is not something physical at all. It may function through a physical organ known as the brain, but the mind itself is not physical. It's something spiritual, something mental. And the fact of the matter is that both the physical and the mental are mutually exclusive. As such, the physical invariably leaves an impact on that which is physical, whilst the mental leaves an impact on that which is mental. It makes no sense whatsoever to say that the body should affect the mind or that the mind should affect the body. For two things to affect one another, there must be a common denominator between them, some intermediary that connects them. But mind and body have no connection whatsoever. That's fact. And yet, the reality is, as we well know, that the two do affect one another. When you take certain medications, something physical, sometimes they can help to calm the mind. Or you can drink alcohol, something physical, and it very much can affect the mind. You can take drugs, something physical, it affects your mind. How does it make sense that these physical entities can affect your mind, your mental state? And conversely, in medicine, there's a phenomenon known as psychosomatic symptoms, where people can imagine something in their minds. Thus, it's purely mental, and yet that impacts on them physically. You can actually talk yourself, sometimes, God forbid, into illness. Or to the flip side, you can sometimes see the power of the mind causes an illness to go into remission. Sometimes this strength of the mind can have an outright curative effect. And reiterating the point, neither of these two ideas makes any sense whatsoever. How can the body affect the mind? How can the mind affect the body if there is no actual connection between the two? How can those physical elements, drugs, alcohol, etc., impact my mind, thus enabling me to see things differently, or vice versa? And that is honestly a very perennial philosophical paradox for questions which really have no answer. All we know is those are the facts. That's the reality. So indeed, all that philosophers ever and can ever really speak about is what they call the mind-body interaction. We simply know that they interact with one another, even as we don't know or understand how. And in facing this reality, especially nowadays, we hear so much, such a great deal about stress. Stress is, in the first instance, a purely mental condition. It's not physical. And yet stress is something which can outrightly affect the body. There are actual physiological changes that occur in the body as a direct result of stress. When you hear of a person, God forbid, having a heart attack or an ulcer, one of the first things a doctor is going to look for is, in terms of causes, is what is it that brought about this stress? Stress decreases and breaks down the immune system. Stress can affect the lymph nodes. Various researchers have demonstrated of how people are affected very badly by heavy stress and despair, and how that can make them more susceptible to certain kinds of extreme illnesses, God forbid. So in the sphere of medicine, we have to look for ways to manage and cope with the stress, hence medications or what have you, which again, something physical to calm the mind, something mental. Research also discovers that very often, if not most of the time, it's not the stress itself that causes the physiological changes or problems. The real source and cause is the perception of the stress. The perception and the interpretation of how a person reacts to whatever particular situation is what is called the stressor. The stressor is that which causes the stress. And the stressor is based on your perception, your interpretation of particular events. And that stressor is infinitely more critical than the actual cause, the external causes that bring a person to stress. So perception plays some weight. And perception is something at the end of the day of my own. It's something that is within me. Then frankly, I should be able to dig deep. And I should be able to find some kind of counter to that within my own self. And the reality is that Jewish philosophy is all about perception. Hasidism is all about how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive the world around us, how we perceive life. It gives us a perspective on life and reality, and therefore gives us balance in how we are to go ahead and perceive all kinds of given situations, and how indeed we should react in any particular kind of given situation. There is an interesting and a profound and a fundamental teaching of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and he says the following. There's a verse in Psalms which says, "He who trusts in God shall be encompassed, surrounded by love, kindness, goodness, divine grace." So the Baal Shem Tov asks the question, what exactly does that mean? Listen carefully, because this becomes one of the most basic teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. There where your mind is at, where your thoughts are at, where your perception is at, that is where you are. That is where you put yourself. In simple terms, the mental impacts the physical, or more precisely, your state of mind and your chosen perspectives impacts your reality. Or to put it differently, a statement from the Zohar, which says the human being and his or her thoughts are identical. You are what you think, and what you think, that is what you are or what you become. And therefore, again, wherever your mind is, wherever your thoughts are, that is where you are. Where you put your thoughts, where you put your mind, how you choose to perceive things, that is where you take yourself. Thus says the Baal Shem Tov, when confronted with whatever sort of situation, if you put your faith in God, then God puts his faith in you. If you believe that God got you to it, then he will get you through it, then that's exactly how it can happen for you. So much so, says the Baal Shem Tov, that things which were not meant to happen to you, divine grace, divine blessings, which were not necessarily written in the cards to happen to you, will still come about and will still come to pass simply because you thought in those positive ways. But here's the kicker. If it works like that in the positive, it can work like that in the negative as well. And as the Baal Shem Tov continues, quoting from a different verse in Isaiah, which God says, that which they are afraid of, that I shall bring upon them. In other words, if you spend a lifetime thinking only negative, oy vey, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, oh, I'm sure this is going to happen, guess what? Those thoughts themselves can, heaven forfend, bring about those very things that you were afraid of. They weren't meant to happen, they weren't in the program, but the fact that you put your mind into that, you create a certain kind of negative aura around you, and that can cause things, God forbid, to go awry. Was that then not, after all, the whole essence of the Purim story? When you think about how in the first instance, the Jewish people took themselves out of divine grace, took themselves out of their state of faith, and applied themselves entirely into the hands of the king Ahasuerus, or into the hands of the king Haman, and then ultimately started to despair in the face of it all. And only afterwards does Queen Esther give an immediate instruction. Our first step towards salvation is mental, psychological, and thus spiritual rehabilitation. Start putting your faith back in God. Start recognizing the fact that God got you to this, God will get you through this. The first thing she says is gather together, pray, fast, etc., etc. Once they recalibrated their thinking process, the immediate salvation started to kick in. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi passed away after Shabbat on a Saturday night on the 24th of the month of Teves in a small village as he was fleeing Napoleon. There was nobody in his room at the time of his passing except for his grandson, whose name was Menachem Mendel, later to become the third Rebbe of Chabad, otherwise known as the Tzemach Tzedek. His mother died when he was a young child, so his grandfather, Rabbi Shneur Zalman Abuladi, was the one who raised him. They're alone in the room now. His grandfather is lying nearby, knowing as he did that he was soon going to be returning his soul to his maker. His grandson is standing there and he's brokenhearted. And now it's nighttime, so he proceeds to do the evening service, but in a very sad and melancholy undertone, singing to himself a kind of sad tune expressing simply his feelings, knowing his grandfather is soon to pass. His grandfather is lying there and then notices this, waits till after he finishes his prayers, at which point he summoned the strength to admonish him. He said, "Why did you pray in this sad way?" He said, "What do you mean? Because I know that." Then he proceeded to share with him the following teaching. In the Tanakh, there's a story of the prophet Ezekiel, who saw the divine chariot in the heavens, as described in detail in the first chapter of Ezekiel. And Ezekiel gives a mind-blowing description of what he saw, and it was very disconnected, using human terminology for divine things. And so in one of his descriptions, Ezekiel says, "I saw the heavenly throne, and on this heavenly throne, I saw like the image of a human being sitting upon it." What does that mean? So Rav Shneur Zalman continued. He said, "My own teacher, the Maggid of Mizrich, explained it in the following. On this heavenly throne, I saw the image of a human being. In other words, like the image of a human being, so it will be upon him from the heavenly throne above." Meaning the way that we show ourselves down here below, that's how the response comes from heaven. When we're happy, when you smile, guess what? You're making heaven smile. You're making God smile. And when God smiles at you, believe me, it generates continued feelings and reasons for you to keep on smiling. You know, when somebody's happy, they give graciously and in abundance. If you, however, are sad down here, then you're, as it were, making God sad. And when somebody is sad, doesn't feel like giving, just feels sad, despondent. So whatever comes from above, concluded Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is in your hands. The way you show yourself, that is the way things will be shown to you. That is the happiness recipe. You know, my childhood bedroom in Toronto, there still hangs a poster. It depicts an image of a little boy making a grumpy face, resting on his folded hands, and the caption beneath reads, "I know I'm a somebody because God don't make no junk." That's the most important lesson of it all. Everything I said until now is summarized in that poster. I know I'm a somebody because God don't make no junk. What does that mean? You know what the tactic of the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, really is? It's never, the evil inclination is not going to tell you, don't do a mitzvah or go do a sin. Which Jew is going to listen to that? What does he come and tell you? The exact opposite of that poster. He'll tell you you're a nobody, you're garbage, you're rubbish, you're worthless. Who are you to open a siddur after you've just done X, Y, and Z? How dare you show your face in shul after you've sinned? You haven't been to shul all year. What kind of chutzpah going there Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? You're worthless. Your mitzvahs are worthless. Everything you do is meaningless. And that ultimately is the prime cause of low self-esteem. That idea that I'm not worth anything and what can I possibly achieve? Well, let's consider the absurdity of the argument. If somebody, God forbid, has a heart condition and one of their lungs is no longer working and the stomach is weak and the liver they lost at the Kiddush Club for all the alcohol there and one of the kidneys isn't functioning, but he can still do something. He's 3/4 gone, all the vital organs are half gone, but he loves skiing. He decides he's going skiing and he goes skiing. And guess what? Nabach, he falls and he breaks a leg. What's that person now thinking to himself? Oh, should I even go to a doctor? Should I bother getting a plaster or fix my leg? Why should I? If I go to the doctor, it's going to cost me the plaster is going to cost money. The leg is going to be in a plaster. I'm going to have crutches. I'm 3/4 gone anyway. What's the point? I'll just leave the leg alone. It's one way to go about it. But we know the absurdity of that. How's that going to leave the person feeling even greater despair than before? The alternative is, yes, you're 3/4 gone, but 1/4 of you still have. So try to keep that 1/4 as strong and powerful as possible. By all means, go fix your leg. We might sometimes think we're, I don't know, a half gone, quarter gone, 3/4 gone spiritually, but we have a minute to do a mitzvah here, putting on tefillin. You have a half a minute there to go ahead and light Shabbat candles. You have this second of doing the mitzvah of tzedakah. You're putting the plaster on your leg. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, comes along and says, give up, you're nobody, you're worthless, and it's all a waste of time. If you believe him, if you buy into what he has to say, then you fall into sadness, stress, depression. And that's not going to get you anywhere. Nothing about you then changes. Nothing about you was going to help. But when you change your perspective about who you are, when you engage in doing positive deeds, when you change your perspective, when you encounter whatever it is that's going on out there in your life, and you know that God is with you every step of the way, that therefore means that your perception has changed, the stressor has changed, that diminishes the stress, and that enables you to be in a better and happier place. We all have issues. We all have concerns of different sorts, against which we also have goodness and things to be grateful for. Sure, stuff happens. Life doesn't always go to plan. But to worry, to feel despondent, that's never helped anybody and isn't going to achieve anything. Hence the tactic of looking to replace negative thoughts with positive ones. Life goes on. It's easy to surrender. It's easy to mope around in self-pity. Nothing is solved with that. And in fact, if anything, that can result in things getting even worse. So what's the point? Diversion of mind may not be easy at first. People love to wallow in self-pity, not realizing they're harming themselves and causing harm to those around them at the same time. You owe it to yourself and those affected by you to ask, what can I do to get out of this rut? The past is the past. Now it's time to fast forward, for the future is completely in your hands. It's what we make of it. It's high ground, but every one of us can get there. And finally, the Medrash says that during creation, when the trees observed iron, as it is one of the elements in the earth, they began to shudder. After all, they realized that the metal of the axe has the very real ability to cut them down. Continues the Medrash, the iron retorts, why are you trembling? As long as you don't provide the wood for the axe's handles, you'll remain safe from harm. In other words, iron is telling the trees it would be incapable of destroying them without their assistance. If the trees don't contribute the wood for the axe handle, the iron's efforts to destroy them would be futile. Nothing can cut you down in life if you choose not to allow for it to happen. We are all in control of our own destiny. Your frame of mind, your attitude, your disposition, they're all within your power. Only you can decide your moods, your sense of self-worth, and your destiny. So go out there, smile, don't worry, be happy, and Shabbat Shalom.